Howdy, howdy, howdy. This is Ryan Acid Heads Murphy coming to you with another one of my little pro wrestling uh, video, Voxcast sort of videos on wrestling topics. Smarking off is what I usually call these. So, I'm asking a question here, which I've already decided the answer to, which is what I'm going to talk about, is was Hulk Hogan the best pro wrestler of all time? And there are a couple of different senses you can talk about this in. This is largely in response to like Al Snow and his ilk and the people who agree with him, the mercenary-minded individuals who only see things in terms of dollar signs, and that's all they seem to be able to think of. They don't seem to comprehend that there are other factors that you can think of. For example, a qualitative factor, the quality factor. Quality of matches, because whether or not some of those individuals want to admit it, there's no reason why you can't have someone who can put on a good match that gives people who enjoy ring action what they want, and still be everything else that Hulk Hogan and others who got to that level have been. Ric Flair was, he could give you the great hour match or whatever and put on a great in-ring show that wasn't always he did the same shit, but it wasn't always the same match every goddamn time. He actually knew how to do a match. He could have a good match. And he had the larger-than-life persona and the popularity, the charisma, he had all of it. So, in terms of quality, and those who like to complain about individuals who prefer ring action, the quality of the ring action over the soap opera drama and some of the other stuff, my question has always been, well, why do you have to try and make it an either-or situation? Why can't we have both? So, in terms of quality, Hogan is not the best pro wrestler of all time. In fact, his matches sucked in terms of ring action quality. And I don't think that there's really anyone who would disagree with that. He did some better stuff in his early days. He was better when so you can still find some videos of him in Japan, and he actually could work a match to a degree. But for the vast majority of his career, it was the exact same match every goddamn time. So, in terms of being predictable, the quality of the matches, he just was not good. So let's actually turn it over and look at it from the monetary point of view. How much money did he make? So let's look at it from that mercenary point of view, when you want to look at nothing but the dollar signs. But then, of course, they always want to exclude and ignore vast portions of Hulk Hogan's career when they talk about these things. They say he made the most money of anybody ever, but did he? Did he really? And this is the factor that I really wanted to talk about. How does it balance out? How do you balance it out? Because over the course of his career, did he make people more money than he lost them? That's the question I'd really love answered. And of course it's impossible to truly answer the question, but then let's look at his career. So, he got his start doing Hulk Hogan, working for, I believe, the AWA, the Ganyas, and they were going to put him in a big program. They were going to, and make money, do good business, probably have much better matches. And then he broke his agreement with them to go work for Vince McMahon in WWE, WWF at the time, of course. So right out of the gate, he's just starting to really get popular doing Hulk Hogan, and he's already fucked over an entire a promotion in the territory days before Vince McMahon killed them all. So right out of the gate, Hulk Hogan has cost people money, probably quite a bit of money. So you want to talk about how much money he made people? Let's also consider how much he lost people over the years because of his own personal bullshit, his prima donna diva behavior, and shit like no showing his not fulfilling his obligations. And I don't think, even if you are a cutthroat businessman, you understand that even verbal contracts should mean something. And if you have made an agreement that you're going to show up and you have an obligation to show up and fill out some dates for a show, then, and you no-show them because somebody else has offered you more money, that's still not kosher. You're still being a dick. You have broken your word. So again, right out of the gate, he's costing people money. So he goes to work at WWF for Vince McMahon, and he gets really popular, but actually, if memory serves, he didn't get super popular at first. It wasn't until the exposure from one of the Rocky movies, I think, that he actually got as big as he did. And actually, I think he did that before he went to WWF, so I might be mixing up my dates. Anyway, let's ignore all that. So he goes to WWF to work for Vince McMahon and the whole rock and wrestling connection, and that blows up. It gets huge. And for a solid few years, he is the biggest thing in pro wrestling of all time up to that point. I'm not going to try and take that away from him. But what everybody ignores, people always remember that. That's the Hulk Hogan that everybody remembers, and that's the only part of his career they really want to talk about, honestly. Until the NWO. They never want to remember all the shit in between and after. So let's think about that. So he's huge for a few years, but then people get used to him. They start getting bored with him. They start booing. Even though they've tried to excise that from, just watch OVW, the old school wrestling, or OVW, no, not OVW, that was Ohio Valley Wrestling, OWS, is that right? I am totally blanking on the name of the series. OW. It's the Irish guys that do the old school wrestling. That's how they started the old school wrestling reviews, something like that. Old school OSW, old school wrestling. Is it OSW? Something like that. You can find them on YouTube, and they're really funny. They review old wrestling shows, and that's what they got started doing, including all of the rest. They did, I think, most of the WrestleManias, if not all of them, the old school ones. They did the entire Hogan era, basically. And you can watch through that, and you can start to see the point where his popularity is starting to wane, to fade. And there are differences. They talk about the differences that the WWE releases of those things, how they cut out booing and pipe-in cheering from the old, which you can still hear all the booing on the VHS tapes, because one of them, when they were doing the old ones, one of them would always watch the old VHS release, and one of them, the others would watch, they would find multiple copies so they could see what was different on the different releases of these pay-per-view shows. And they found that, without exception, anytime there was a lot of booing going on for a top babyface, somebody was supposed to be a babyface like Hogan, they would, in the WWE releases, they would have cut that out and piped in cheering. They edited. Revisionist history going on there. which is never a good thing. So you have a solid 2.5, 3 years of Hulk Hogan keeping himself on top past the point where he should have been, culminating in his returning from the steroid scandal, fucking over Bret Hart, essentially, and then leaving. So, just right there, you have, again, this prima donna diva behavior that really put WWF into a nosedive in the early 90s. All because of Hulk Hogan's fucking ego. So how do you balance it out? How much money did he lose, Vince McMahon, in those few years, compared to how much he made for him? I'm sure he made, it balances out in favor of making more money in the short term, but how about in the long term? Because he, by fucking over Bret Hart, who is going to become the biggest star through the early to mid-90s, along with Shawn Michaels for WWF, and really it was those two and a handful of others who kept WWF alive, because things got bad enough that WWF could have gone out of business in the early 90s, early to mid-90s. They were hurting pretty bad. And it was Hulk Hogan who helped drive it into the ground. Damn near to the point of going out of business. So again, how do you balance that out? And then let's go back even further than that, though. Let's consider all the careers he fucked over on his way to the top. Because think about, you can watch all those old shows, and again, the Irish guys, is it OSW? Old School Wrestling Review. I think. Something like that. So they really dig into the behavior of some of these guys, and every time there's a Hogan match, it is fascinating to see the bullshit he would pull, the little tricks, the 100 little ways that he would find to make sure that he would steal the spotlight and undercut other people. But even then, just the basis of his popularity. Look at how he, dealt with the wrestlers. It was an old school way of doing things, but you're doing it on national TV. So, when he makes his big comeback, beats down the heel that they've built, they've built up a monster heel to go after Hulk Hogan, and he has to slay the dragon, as they would put it. But the way he did it makes them look like a fucking chump, because he makes his comeback, hulks up and no-sells everything, and then just wipes them out within moments. He gets beat up for a long time, usually. There's a lot of back and forth brawling or whatever, and then suddenly he beats him. It makes him look like a joke, without exception. And none of them ever recover from it. So how many careers did he cut short, hinder, destroy with his, doing things his way? And it wasn't just the heels. I mean, you want a good example, Ted DiBiase. He went from being the top heel in the company to being a mid-carder that, he was still good, but he never got back in the main event scene because everybody had already seen it. There's nothing else for him to do. Because it was always all about Hogan. Look at how he would undercut Randy Savage. Go back and watch that shit. Every chance he got, he would do something to undercut Randy Savage. Why do you think Savage hated his guts? And contrary to what Hogan has claimed, nobody that, I've watched a few interviews where the subject has come up. Savage never made up with Hogan. Those two never buried the hatchet, according to anybody. Only Hulk Hogan claims it, because he's a fucking spotlight whore and always has to try and make himself look good. But you know, again, you can go back and watch all those things, all the shit that he did with Randy Savage. Every chance he got, he undercut him. Ultimate Warrior, same shit. Every chance he got, he undercut Warrior. And the same thing happened with every babyface. Every chance he got, every opportunity he could, he would undercut him. To keep himself on top and make sure nobody else became competition. The problem is that when you do shit that way, inevitably people get tired of him. It's inevitable. It wasn't like the old days when somebody could tour around the country because Vince McMahon had fucking killed the territories. There wasn't anywhere else to go except WCW, which is what he ended up doing in the long run. Hogan did. But it was on national TV all the time. He was on national TV, shoved down everybody's throats for like 4 fucking years. And yeah, he was on top, he was riding high, and it was really hot for about 3.5, 4 years during the heyday before it got overexposed, because again, that's something else people don't seem to want to remember, is that for the first couple of years when he was getting real popular, it wasn't overexposed. He wasn't on TV constantly. There weren't pay-per-views, that many pay-per-views. But then the last couple of years of his hot streak, the more exposure he got, the more people started getting tired of it, because it was the same shit every goddamn time. They got used to it. They saw what was coming. They knew what was going to happen. So you have Hulk Hogan, again, for the last 3 years or so he was there, a serious decline in his popularity, and there was nobody to take his place. Savage had to, was basically forced to spend the majority of his career, when he should have been in his prime, doing all of his best stuff, always had to be in Hogan's shadow, because Hogan would never let him get to the top and stay there for any length of time. Same thing with Ultimate Warrior, whether you like him or you don't like him. For a while, he was incredibly popular. He was actually getting to be more popular than Hogan. But again, Hogan did everything he could to undercut him and make him look bad, or to steal the thunder, steal the spotlight. That's why Warrior hated his guts, amongst other reasons. Not that Warrior wasn't kind of out there himself, but he did have reasons. If you don't believe me, go watch the video online and take some of it with a grain of salt, of course, but there's enough truth in there to see why Hogan, at least in the backstage, is also one of the most hated pro wrestlers of all time. So you take into account all the money that that he lost, Vince McMahon, in those last 3 years. And then on from there, even after he left, it took a long time for WWF to really start recovering. Because again, there was nobody to take his place. The entire company's popularity was built around one man. And when that popularity started declining, as it inevitably would with all the exposure on TV and pay-per-views becoming more common over those 3 years, who's gonna take over? Who's gonna be the man? Especially when you have Hogan, who doesn't think that anybody else should be or could be, undercutting everybody to try and stay on top and force himself to stay on top, and riding the company into the fucking ground, basically. So how does that balance out? Did he really make Vince McMahon more money than he lost him in the long run? Because you can pretty much set the early to mid-90s slump of WWF squarely on the shoulders of Hulk Hogan. Vince McMahon, of course, is responsible ultimately for letting Hogan get away with all the shit that he pulled. And I will say that ultimately all the mistakes are McMahon's responsibility, because he okayed everything that happened. But if Hogan was less of a spotlight whore, if he was less of a diva, less of an egomaniac, and also, that whole inferiority superiority complex thing where most of the time the superiority complex is in place to mask the inferiority complex, so incredibly insecure Hulk Hogan was and probably still is about everything. So if he was less of an asshole, how much more money could have Vince McMahon made in the long run? How much money did Hulk Hogan lose Vince McMahon in the long run? It's an interesting question to ponder. So let's move from WWF, now WWE, of course, and go to WCW. Everybody seems to want to gloss over the earlier days of Hulk Hogan and WCW. They always want to act like him joining the NWO and turning heel was the first thing he ever did there. No. Go back and watch the Dungeon of Doom. He was there for a solid year or two, I believe, before I think he was there from like 94 to 96, something like that, so it was like a year and a half, 2 years. And look at the shit he was doing. He lost WCW more business. They weren't doing that great before he went there, but with the whole Dungeon of Doom crap, he didn't make them any money. He lost them money. And besides whatever gargantuan, idiotic, guaranteed contract with creative control they gave him initially, he didn't make a fucking dime. I'll quote the meme or paraphrase the meme. He didn't draw a fucking dime for WCW, or he didn't make a dime for WCW through those years. But even let's examine the NWO days. So him joining the NWO comes in, creates some attention. Things start getting hot. Hogan turns heel, first time he's ever done that, at least since he got really popular. He became a name, so that helps drive things, and things start getting hot. But as I understand it, and I've heard this from more than one source, WCW only actually made money in 98. Maybe some in 97, but some in 97 into 98, where the only year or two, the couple of years that WCW was actually profitable for Time Warner, from the time that it was bought to the time it was sold. And the height of, the most money that they were actually making was because of Goldberg. Now, I don't like Goldberg either, and I can actually, that's really another video about monster wrestling, building up monsters, and why these days it doesn't work. You can't do it, because in the long run it's going to fail. At least doing it that way. I suppose Brock Lesnar, with his periodic appearances, kinda has worked as a monster. But the way they did Goldberg was never going to succeed in the long run. It was really hot while it was going, but it was always going to fail in the long run. But let's think about it. So you have the only time that WCW is actually making money, making profits. It's down mostly to Goldberg and how popular that whole thing got. And who fucked it up? Let's go back and think about it. Who fucked that up? Well, fuck if it wasn't Kevin Nash and Hulk Hogan. Because they wanted the belt on Hogan, and Hogan did not want to work with Goldberg. So what do? And of course, Nash's ego, I'm sure, got in there. So whoever you want to put the blame on, be it Hogan or Nash or both of them, I think they should share blame in the finger poke. You have Nash win the title and end the streak, and then a week later, finger poke of doom, business starts declining, ratings start going down, and the double blender, of course, of Mick Foley winning and them talking about it. They start losing the Monday Night Wars. I don't know why it's called Monday Night Wars. Not like there was multiple skirmishes or something. So they start losing the ratings. Business starts declining. The Finger Poke of Doom pissed off a lot of people, alienated a lot of fans, hurt their feelings, as some would say. Jim Cornette tends to use that turn of phrase, you know. It did. It hurt the fans' feelings. I was watching at the time. I saw it happen. And yeah, I'd say it hurt my feelings. Because, I mean, it was just a clear sign to me, you know what, it's just going to be more of the same. You know, they're just going to go back to the same old shit. But even the NWO, at that point, you know, there was nothing else to do with it. You know, the whole thing turned into a fucking disaster, largely because of Hulk Hogan. Because it started off really hot. In 96 and into 97, it was real hot to start with. But then they start bringing in all these extra people. And before you know it, the NWO has made WCW look like a complete joke. They have nobody to work with because, you know, the only baby faces that are still somewhat viable are like DDP and Sting, but they've ground them into the fucking dirt at this point. So what else was there for them to do? That's why it split up into the red and black and the black and white, because who else were they going to fucking work with except each other? They had destroyed WCW and made them look like fucking jokes. And even then, you knew what was going to happen every fucking NWO match. It was always going to be the same shit. So, you know, you had this whole thing that you were hoping, a lot of people were hoping was going to finally just finish off the NWO storyline. One way or the other, they were either going to shrink back down to something more manageable, WCW could make a comeback, something was going to happen there, and then they did the Finger Poke of Doom. They fucked over the entire storyline of the Wolfpack, the Red and Black, you know, and they just went back to doing the same shit that they had been doing. And the whole thing was just so sleazy and underhanded and cheap. It hurt a lot of people's feelings. It pissed a lot of fans off. People started, you know, turning it off. Because that was one of the reasons why Goldberg got so popular, was because it was different. He was a babyface, basically, and he actually won matches. Even against the NWO guys. Which hadn't happened for ages. It was like he was finally somebody who was a threat. Finally somebody that the fans could get behind against the NWO. And they fucked it over. They just completely fucked it up. For their own ego, their own gratification. And because Hogan is a prima donna little bitch that won't work with certain people just because he doesn't want to be made to look bad. Or he gets it into his head that he's better than they are and he shouldn't have to work with them. Whatever his rationalization is to try and excuse it. Doesn't really matter. So yeah, look at, he never made WCW any money. You really want to take a look at the entire history of his time in WCW. He took a huge amount of money from Time Warner. Never actually made them any money. Spent the last years, or however long it was of his contract, sitting on his ass doing fuck all. So did he make himself a lot of money? Yeah, but he didn't make anybody else any. He didn't make other wrestlers look good. He didn't help other wrestlers make more money, unless they were his buddies and he got them big contracts, which isn't the same thing as actually making money with people. Drawing money. So, you want to try and act like the NWO was some huge fucking deal, and maybe it was in some ways, but in the end, it was Hulk Hogan, just as much as Hogan was the one who made it blow up even bigger, and because if it had just stayed Hall and Nash, it would have fizzled. People, especially Nash marks, love to act like he was some hotshot. He never was. Nash in WWF had to be with Shawn Michaels to actually have anything happening with it all, and in WCW he had to have Hogan. Nash was never a draw. I don't care what anybody tries to claim otherwise. He always had to have other people backing him up to actually get anywhere. He wasn't that good of a talker, and his in-ring work was shit. So, anybody who's a Nash mark is a fucking mark of the worst kind. Most gullible twit you're ever going to find in pro wrestling. In a pro wrestling fan, I should say. Because Nash was always the buddy. He was always the sidekick to somebody else. So if it had just been Nash and Hall, it would have fizzled. They needed Hogan to make it blow up the way it did. But then, again, it's the exact same thing with, like I talked about with WWF, only even faster. Took something, it was really hot for a while, and then they ran it into the ground, because firstly, the powers that be didn't know what the fuck to do with it, and second, because Hogan had creative control, they couldn't tell him no. When he started wanting to bring it, I'm going to bring in Brutus, my brother Brutai, is the disciple. And I want the Giant. Whoever was responsible for doing all that shit, be it Hogan or the powers that be, and you have to believe that if Hogan really didn't want it to happen, he could say no. So obviously, in the end, this is another case where he had the power to keep things under control and on a certain path that could have worked for a while, and been really successful and not made WCW look like fucking idiots that were just there to be the little bitches for the NWO, which I think is what the NWO marks like about them, is that they made everybody else look like little bitches because, they're that kind of a people. But business-wise, it leaves WCW with nothing, and in the end, the NWO has nobody to work with. Which, again, like I said, that's why they ended up having to work with each other. They had to split up and work with each other because they had fucked over everybody else to the point that there was nobody to work with. So, Hulk Hogan and WCW didn't make WCW any money, didn't make any of the wrestlers any money, only made a shitload of money for himself, which makes him a con artist as far as I'm concerned. Ultimately, he's a con artist in those years of his life. So let's keep going. Let's look at his return to the WWF. Did he actually have any real impact there? One match. His match with The Rock at WrestleMania. That was the only thing that really is significant of any of the times he's returned to WWE. This is one thing. How much money did he take from Vince McMahon and really not make any money for him? Except for that one match. And how, again, you hear the stories about he was supposed to work with Shawn Michaels, and that ended in the one match where Shawn Michaels makes him look like or makes a mockery of the whole thing, because, again, you hear variations on the story, but it usually comes down to Hulk Hogan being a little baby again. So, again, that could have been a really hot program for a while, but it didn't happen. There was one match that is now one of the most joked about matches of WWF history, really, because of Shawn Michaels overselling everything to the point of, again, making a mockery of the proceedings. How much money did Hogan lose for Vince McMahon there? And those are just a handful. The stories that get out about what Hogan has done over the years that get out are just the handful that, like I said, have actually gotten out. How many other stories are there that we've never heard of Hogan costing people money because he's a big baby? When he went to TNA, did he actually do them any favors when he was there? No. So, no matter how you want to look at it, even if you want to try and make it all about the money, the balance of his career, he made Vince McMahon a bunch of money, yes, for about 4 years. The entire rest of his career, he did nothing but lose money for people and take a shitload of money from them. In the long run, like I said, he took a lot of money and and didn't make any back for them in the long run. And, throughout WCW, all he did was cost them money, both in terms of his contract and his behavior, and what he forced, his creative control clause allowing him to basically dictate what WCW as an entire company was doing, which ended up killing it in the long run. So yeah, you want to talk about how much money did Hogan make over the period of about 4 years when he was actually at his peak. How does that balance out to pretty much driving WCW into the ground to the point that it went out of business? He may not have ultimately killed it. You can put that blame on Russo or Bischoff or whatever. But he was the one that was responsible for putting WCW in that position in the first place. Him not being able to, not wanting to work with people, not wanting to do the job when he should have, taking the spotlight away from people that really should have had it when he shouldn't have, driving the NWO into the ground by either bringing in or allowing to be brought in all these other people that didn't need to be part of it and shouldn't have been part of it, keeping it going way longer than it should have gone on, ending Goldberg's streak and fucking over the one thing that was actually making WCW money at that, for the first time ever, basically. He may not have put the final nail in the coffin, but he sure as fuck put enough in there to lay a lot of the blame on WCW's death on Hogan himself. And again, taking money from Vince McMahon to really not do much of anything for him when he made his comebacks in WWE, taking money from TNA and not really doing anything to make the money back in the long run. So yeah, factor in, even if you want to completely discount the fact that quality-wise his matches were shit his entire career, the entirety of his popular career. If you really do want to just look at the money side of it, stop looking at just those 4 years and stop, acting like the NWO was actually profitable. Because in the end it wasn't. All he ever did after that first 4 years, when he blew up and he was huge and probably the hugest thing that ever happened in pro wrestling until Steve Austin and The Rock, I won't take that away from him, but when you balance that few years against the entire rest of his career, not to mention, I haven't mentioned yet, the racism, the sex scandal, or the porn scandal, and everything else that has happened late, in the last decade or so, to make himself and pro wrestling vicariously look bad. Try and do the equation in your own head. Does it balance out? I don't fucking think so. Not even close. In the long run, by helping Vince McMahon kill off the territories, he did immeasurable harm to pro wrestling as a business in the whole. So that alone completely counteracts any success he had, as far as I'm concerned. But then you pile on the rest of, all the careers that he fucked up because of his ego. The promotions, WCW, TNA, and even WWF, that he hurt in the long run because of his ego. Vince McMahon, over the course of his career, did vastly more harm than he ever did good for pro wrestling as a business. And when it comes to making money, especially in an entertainment industry like pro wrestling, which is a team thing, you cannot look at the success that he did have as mattering more than all the harm he did. Like I said about the territories, helping Vince McMahon put all the territories out of business. How many lives did he ruin? Did he help ruin by doing that? You want to talk about him and Vince McMahon making all that money for those few years in the 80s. How many mouths did he, how many, providers, let me rephrase it, I went off in one direction, it didn't really make sense, but how many providers careers did he ruin by helping Vince McMahon put the territories out of business? How many promoters' lives did he maybe not ruin as to the degree as the wrestlers, but how many careers did he help kill? How many promotions did he help kill? And then during his tenure in WWF, how many careers did he kill? Kill, cut short, cripple because of his ego. And just the way he worked his matches, like I said towards the beginning of this. So yeah, if you're one of those people that wants to believe that Hogan was the best of all time in either capacity, I want you to actually look at the history, think about all the shit that he's done over the years, from that very start of walking, of fucking over, the Ganyas, and walking out on his obligation there to go work for Vince McMahon to begin with. Everything he did to help put the territories out of business, all the careers that he fucked over, either in the back or right there out in front of the people with his style and his way of working a match in the ring, and effectively ending any heat and believability that every single heel that went up against him had, and dropping him either to the mid-card or even putting him out of the company, and where the fuck were they to go from there? Driving WWF into the ground, driving WCW into the ground, and ultimately helping to kill it, taking money and not making any back, and everything that he's done that's a negative. Pile up all those negatives on your mental scales and put that 3-4 years of his popularity, the height of his popularity, and see, does that, and think, does that really balance out to you? And honestly, if you think it does, or somehow you think that his success somehow overshadows all the negatives, there's something wrong with you. You're a fucking fanboy, you're a mark, and you just don't want to accept that Hogan did way, 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 way more harm than he ever did good. And compare him to, like, Ric Flair. Again, I'm sure Ric Flair had his diva moments. That's always going to happen with people. But the thing about Ric Flair, like I said, qualitative qualitatively wise, quality wise, he could go out there and have a good match with anyone. You could be a rookie and he'd make you look like $1,000,000. You know, because he would work with you. If he needed to do a job and, it was, maybe he had to be, talked into doing it because, maybe you had to explain why he needed to do the job, he'd do it. He built his career on making people look good. Outside of the ring, you hear the stories, and maybe he's a bit of a dick outside the ring, but when it comes to pro wrestling, Ric Flair always class act. Wanted to work with people, wanted to make people look good, succeeded at making other people look good, never made them look bad, to make himself look good, and successfully got himself over and other people over all through his career, and he had a fantastic career. And compare that to Hogan, who took, made everybody he worked with look bad in the end to satisfy his own ego and insecurity. And again, quality-wise, and you want to compare like Randy Savage even. Randy Savage, always willing to help somebody look good if he needed to. I don't think I've ever heard a single person say about Randy Savage that he was selfish. Or Ricky Steamboat, that's the big thing, was the Savage Steamboat match really the best match on that WrestleMania card. Quality-wise, fuck yes, and ultimately personality-wise, in the long run, fuck yes, as far as I'm concerned. Because you talk about any of the other greats, I'm sure they all had their diva moments. It's inevitable. It happens. But ultimately, you look at the body of work, and Hogan, always selfish, always being the spotlight whore, always doing everything he can to make himself look good and everybody else look bad. And you compare that to, like I said, about Ric Flair, always willing to make other people look good, to help them look good, to teach, to elevate, and able to do it without ever looking bad himself. And you always hear the same thing. Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, great guy to work with, would make anybody look like $1,000,000 and never hurt himself doing it. Randy Savage, make you look like $1,000,000, never hurt himself doing it. Dusty Rhodes. People talk a lot of shit about Dusty. He'd make you look like $1,000,000 and not hurt himself doing it. And if he needed to do a job, and it made sense for him to do the job, he'd do it. And the same goes, you can look at any name down the line. Over the course of the history of pro wrestling, you hear about a few real assholes in there. But then you look at WWE, and it's amazing, seems to be kind of amazing that probably the two biggest divas in the history of pro wrestling, two of the most successful guys in pro wrestling, with Shawn Michaels and Hulk Hogan also. But it's amazing that they both came out of Vince McMahon's little factory there, and ultimately. So you kind of have to wonder, what kind of a work environment is that? And what has pro wrestling as a whole lost because Vince McMahon and his schoolyard bully mentality put guys like Hulk Hogan and Shawn Michaels at the top of the, at the pinnacle, and it was guys like Ric Flair, the ones who were really good, that ended up not doing as well because money and connections, basically. Vince McMahon's product was never better. He just had more money and connections to work with. But you look at the Attitude Era. You want to talk about Steve Austin? Steve Austin worked his way up through the territories. And you hear things about Steve Austin keeping guys down sometimes, but not to the degree. You don't hear about the machinations behind the scenes from Austin. You don't hear horror stories about shit he did compared to say Hogan. And another one that has become notorious for holding people down and being a spotlight whore, Triple H. And according to some people, John Cena. All fucking products of the WWE and Vince McMahon. Why is it, The Rock is just, you could ask about The Rock, but then third generation wrestler. He grew up around wrestlers, so he would have, kind of had it instilled in him that, you don't treat people like that. Plus, he's a nice guy. He made other people look good and never hurt himself. Steve Austin, when he needed to, he made other people look good and never hurt himself. He knew they were able to make themselves look good and the other guy look good at the same time. And that is the hallmark of really great wrestlers. So, again, you want to just talk about ring work, even, not the quality of the ring work in certain aspects, but just the quality of the worker involved. Hogan never made anyone look good. His entire career, he never did. His entire career was based on making himself look good at everybody else's expense. He is not a good pro wrestler. He's not a great pro wrestler. He's not even a mediocre pro wrestler. Hulk Hogan was a personality that thinks to the right, being right place, right time, being in a movie, and because of Vince McMahon's connections and money, was put in a position to become huge. But as a pro wrestler, as a person, all the shit that's come out about him, all the things that have been found out about him, he's a horrible fucking human being, and he's a horrible fucking pro wrestler. In the end, Hulk Hogan is not the best pro wrestler of all time. In everything that matters, he is absolutely one of the worst of all time. And that is me basically wrapping this whole thing up. So if you want to try and argue with me over this, you can try. Feel free to leave a comment in the comments section. Please upvote the video or downvote. Just leave a vote on the video one way or the other, or not at all if you don't like, but I'd appreciate it if you would. And share the video with your pro wrestling friends, and subscribe for more content. I do a variety of content, some pro wrestling, video game design, music. I have a pro wrestling fantasy promotion that I put stuff up for periodically. So subscribe and you can see stuff as it comes up when I put up new stuff. And of course, thanks very much for listening. I'll see y'all in the next one. Bye bye.